Hello. I was going to wait until daylight to make this video, but to be honest, it doesn't need a visual because you can picture things in your mind as I speak. So the title of this video is Atlantis, not as a myth, but in practice. What do I mean by that? Now, I can only go on what I've heard and what I've read and the accepted concept that it's a series of concentric rings. So you could say it would have an outer circle, one or more intermediate circles, and then an inner circle. Can we see anything that sort of reflects that? Well, certainly you've got rings such as the equator, the Tropic of Capricorn, the Tropic of Cancer as one example. You have the, let's get this right, I think it'd be that on the linear, it's the longitudinal lines, so you could say they're a series of concentric circles. Another way, particularly when it involves mysteries and things and getting to the bottom of certain topics, express it as peeling away layers of an onion. So let's think about this Atlantis story. It's sunk, or it's covered up. And it's a series of circles. Just ponder that for a moment. So it's something that's gone into the unseen, and that was the end of that place, civilization, whatever your concept or belief about it is. That will be going off on all sorts of tangents anyway. It's not of actually any relevance. But the pattern, the blueprint that I'm seeing with this, let's consider that it's not a loss. Let's flip the script, and the moving into the unseen actually hides a power or a control system. I could think of something that was created in 1948. We'll call it a nation state. It doesn't matter whether you believe it is real or not is real. But just do the calculation from 1948 to, say, 1967. How many years would that be between the two? How often has that number come up? And in various permutations, you could add a second one, for example, to that. And that particular location, it would come down to what is your thoughts, what is your perception of who's in on it and who's not. Because if you see it as a civilian population, they would form an outer ring. Then it would have a center core to that ring, maybe political or religious, or something along those lines. And of course, that may not even be the inner core. It may not be situated there, for example. It could be a very dark color rock. Is it Schwarzland or something like that? Maybe something neutral, something that doesn't get involved in things directly or wouldn't seem to be, but also supplies a guard to a little independent state, sort of landlocked within Italy, shall we say. And these concentric rings, if you talk to one person, they might point to a particular organisation or a secret society and say it's them behind it, or it's that religious group are behind it, or this and that are all linked. I tend to look not just at blueprints and patterns. There is a structure that is unseen if you think about it with any business or any organisation that is very much like a pyramid with a president or a chairperson at the top, a committee, and then members, or a workforce and middle management, and then a workforce. It follows a pyramidical structure or a triangular structure. So you've got many unseen pyramids. Let me sort of go off on a slight tangent, but this all will tie together. If we take this as being a stage, a world stage, and there is a script, and we call it scriptures. If you run with the perception as given by Neville Goddard, you can take the Old Testament and the New Testament and it all flows perfectly well. But when it comes into the physical reality, because it has been taken literally, it plays out in the literal interpretation and materializes as such. And because the universe is you inverse and everything external of you is a reflection, things get flipped, just like when you look in the mirror. And if you move to the left, that reflection will actually move to the right because it's flipped. So therefore, if this reality is all a reflection, external of anything that is external of you, well, now Atlantis may have sunk into the unseen because it is hiding behind many faces. It would, shall we say, replicate something else and set itself up to impersonate something else, hiding behind many identities. But in order to do that, in order to impersonate the source of everything that would see everything, it would require ways of seeing everything, like maybe listening into anything that goes through a cell phone, through internet cables, and much, much more. It would, in effect, be an all-seeing eye and also have a way of being able to predict, but by looking at patterns and being able to replicate things with patterns. So talking of common ground, one thing that is very apparent, and it is something that is being very skillfully worded by a channel called Static in the Attic, the main focus and attention that Static is talking about and showing, strangely, by strange coincidence, Karimio Aho channel has done a series of videos called Don't Mention the Chazars, and Dante Fortson, I believe it's Dante Fortson channel, please correct me in the comments if I've got the name wrong, also points to this same group, and you can see a flip of the atom taking place, as it were. If you consider the solid part of the atom, the bit that you could see is 0.0001%, and I emphasize that bit on the end, and the nothingness of the atom is the 99.999%. So now if we bring the atom into physicality, into the material, could it be that that tiny solid bit, that 0.001%, has become the unseen but is having such an influence on the 99.999%? Is it coincidence? Am I seeing too much in these things? Certainly, if you look into most things, conspiratorial or otherwise, you will find there is a common thread of a particular group, shall we say. But also consider, let's put this in a biblical story terms of Jesus and the disciples. There is one disciple who betrays, which is a role that is chosen. So you could say he was a chosen one. And maybe it's assumed when we hear that term, chosen one, well, I would ask, chosen for what? Chosen by whom? Make of this what you will. I'm not pointing a finger, because I'll have three pointing back at me, but what I am highlighting is there is a common theme with this particular group, particularly in such things as deception, such things of the solid part of the atom seeming to gain, working like a hidden hand, got its fingers in all the pies, because this particular thing wants all of the pie. The very nature of it would seem to suggest that. The agents of that would seem to be a group that associates itself with a slightly larger group, which from that perspective of that inner core, you could say that's why the outer core are given the story that they are the chosen ones, for example. I don't feel I need to use any names that might be sensitive to the senses and make their senses sore. I feel that you can read between the lines of what I'm saying, and if not, then I would refer you to the three channels in particular I have mentioned, but they are certainly not throughout a very long period of time who have all pointed to this particular group, and there is a history of this particular group always being a stranger in whichever host nation they go into, and also have a way of somehow being found out for misdeeds and kicked out of or expelled from a particular country. In the case of France, about 3 times. I believe it was under Edward I in England. But it's a multi-layered thing, and that may only be one of the outer rings of whatever this particular inverse Atlantis pattern structure or organization actually is. Actually, Static in the Attic has just put out a video, and I left a comment about that. This old film has come to light, and there's he mentions about it could be for financial gain from a subsequent book that was written on the experiences of this gentleman that's featured in this film. I forget the name, but consider about, well, who owns most of the publishing houses, and how did that slip through the net, as it were? If it's true, why would something that is seemingly hidden want to show a part of itself? Or could it be a knowledge of knowing what human energy is capable of truly doing, how truly powerful collective human energy is, if it can be coerced with a story? The combined efforts may produce enough energy from a belief or a feeling that something is true that could either bring something into the material reality, or at least create a concept that is accepted as so real that it has an adverse effect, because it is described as an adversary. It is all one great big advert, and it adds and diverts your attention away from your inner self. So I'm not specifically pointing a finger at a particular group of people, because we're in a realm that is not black and white like a chessboard as such. Again, notice how that often comes up about checkerboards and things being black and white, and black hats and white hats and red hats and blue hats. it just keeps going and going. But it's the term that Static uses, the greys. And there's an awful big grey area, slap bang in the middle. And by extension of that, just think of Ancient Alien franchise and, of course, the Greys. Another little pattern, just as a side note, leading on from Ancient Aliens. This Billy Carson would seem to be the Ancient Alien equivalent of the character that Eddie Murphy played in Trading Places. Just a little observation. I can see a similarity there. But again, one of the outer rings. A slightly inner ring would be someone like Graham Hancock. Still one of the outer rings, but his hands are tied. He is bound. He's not. He's just going to ignore. He's not going to accept the archaic's challenge, and because the data is watertight, there will be no flood from that data. I have messages and things from people from time to time who question whether Jason of Archaics is real. I would suggest to that, or my answer to that would be, look at what your subconscious does. It is impartial. So if you implant the idea in your conscious mind of I want a Ferrari, the subconscious doesn't know what a Ferrari is. For a start, it will respond in the language it communicates of feeling, and you will just get more feeling of want. Because by the very implication of that, you are saying that you haven't got. You are in a position or a perspective of lack of something you want, but you do not have. And because the subconscious is impartial, it will just serve up more of that. So I'm going to be impartial on this and say it's the evidence, it's the data. Jason has put out the challenge to show if there's any flaws in it. As far as I know, nobody can and nobody is likely to, because it is watertight. It is self-proving. I have taken the blueprint of the data and proven it with this series of coincidences, repeat patterns, whatever you want to call it, but it's there to be seen. It's self-proving. But this is the thing, nobody will attack the data, they will attack the personality that is presenting the data, which is ridiculous, because the data still stands. And if you think about atoms, they make up cells, do they not? So stronger together. So the information is now out there. There is no need for any arguments over anything on chronology. That's an open and shut case. It's just going to prove itself more and more. Armed with that, which is a huge asset, will free up your time, your true currency. Because time in the physicality is finite, so spend your time wisely. So yes, I invite you to look at Chronicon, I invite you to look at the data, but then also turn to the more of the immortal soul aspect of all of this. Everything comes from within. Everything external of you is a reflection. The universe is you in verse. And consider when you inverse. A verse can be sung by a core us, more than one, stronger together. I have looked at and cited things from other channels. Many of these channels, one or other channel does not like the other channel for whatever reasons. I'm asking you to leave all that aside and look at the blueprints, look at the patterns, look at the common ground, look at the common thread. It comes back to what Jason says, one of the tenets of archaics. If something is true, it can be seen from multiple angles. And interestingly, those multiple angles all seem to magnify that saying about all roads lead to Rome comes to mind. But where would we be roaming to? Is it an endless rabbit hole? Will we ever find that inner core? Well, I would suggest flipping it and look for the inner core in oneself. Go there first. You don't put a building up unless you're building on a solid foundation in this physical realm. Now internalize that. The immortal soul aspect, the discovery of one's true self, is what will make all the difference. That is the game changer. That is the key. That is something that is within you. Can I find another example of that? Yes. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 13:5, I believe it is. I'm not too worried about the numbers, but from that aspect, but it whatever the verse is, it says, do you not know that Christ is within you? Christ means an anointed one. So if you go with your gut feeling, your intuition, you allow that to rise inside yourself, Kundalini rising, that the gut feeling, the power and the wisdom has never got a, calls it, of God, of source. Your direct communication, your direct line to source from the gut up to pineal. That's your direct line. That's your intuition, which is in a spiritual essence of communication. On a positive note, I am seeing a strengthening of synchronized thoughts, and we could call it telepathy, we could call it spiritual internet. Everything in this material is a replication of something in the spiritual, the World Wide Web. You name it, whatever it is, there is a counterpart in the unseen. You can play out Genesis. If you've got a cell phone in your left hand, for example, you've paid your internet or your bill for your connection, and your battery's at, say, 90%. So you've seen it, and you've seen that it is good. Now you move your right hand across the screen to the power button, so your right hand moves across the surface, and you switch the phone on, and effectively in your mind you have given the command, let there be light. You have just played out Genesis. That is reflected to you to give you a clue to find out what you are an aspect of. That is here, the boots on the ground, to have the physical experience. How does that sound? How does that resonate in you? I'm asking that because I wish you to ask that question to yourself. I'm going to leave that there, I think. And once again, I am going to say unconditional love to you all.